The wind had settled into a low howl by sundown, brushing against the corners of Holt Barrett's worn ranch house like a ghost looking for cracks to sneak through. He sat alone at the table, the familiar creak of the wooden floor beneath his boots the only sound besides the pop of the fire. Outside, the Texas plains stretched quiet and wide, not a soul in sight for miles, just the way he thought he preferred it. Since his wife passed 3 years ago, Holt had let silence be his only company. The ranch was running on fumes, the stock thinned out, the house dusty, and the pantry even emptier than his heart. He wasn't much for talk anymore. Didn't see the point. Until the knock came. A sharp, timid knock at the front door split the quiet like a gunshot. Holt froze. He wasn't expecting company. No one ever came this far out without a reason. He stood slowly, hand brushing instinctively over the pistol at his hip, and walked to the door. When he opened it, the last of the day's light was disappearing behind a stretch of low hills, and standing in that fading gold was a woman wrapped in a faded blue shawl, dust on her boots and shadows under her eyes. She looked up at him, nervous but trying to appear composed. She held herself straight despite the weight clearly dragging at her shoulders. "I was told you might need a cook," she said softly, her voice thin from travel but steady. "If the position's still open, I can work hard. Clean too." Holt stared at her, more confused than anything. He hadn't put out word for a cook, not directly. Maybe Buck, the supply man in town, had mentioned it last week when Holt had joked about starving. But this woman? He was about to say no. He didn't want anyone here. Didn't want the noise, the questions, or the memories her presence would stir. But then a small hand appeared from behind the woman's skirt, clutching the fabric. A little girl, no older than 6, peeked out from behind her. Pale brown eyes, freckled cheeks, a thin braid hanging over one shoulder. Silent as a shadow, but something about her stopped Holt in his tracks. He blinked, stunned. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. The girl's gaze met his, wide and wary, but familiar. "Name's Clara," the woman added, almost in a whisper now. "And this is Lottie. We've been on the road a while. I can cook near anything with flour and lard, and we don't ask for much." Holt swallowed. His voice, dusty from disuse, came out rougher than he meant. "Where are you headed?" "Don't rightly know," she admitted. "We were headed west, but my girl got sick for a spell and we had to stop. Sheriff in town said you were alone out here. Thought maybe you'd take us on, at least for a while." The fire behind Holt crackled, warmth brushing his back, but his boots were rooted cold to the porch. He looked again at the child. There was something about her, something he couldn't shake. A tug deep in his gut. He thought of the child he and his wife had lost. Thought of the little wooden doll still on the mantel, gathering dust. It looked just like the one Lottie now clutched in her arms. He exhaled slowly and stepped aside. "Got a spare room," he said gruffly, "and a stove that's cold too often. If you're not afraid of hard work, you can stay." Clara didn't smile, not right away, but relief washed across her face like rain on parched soil. She nodded, quietly urging Lottie inside with a gentle nudge. The girl stepped past him silently, clutching her mother's skirt, eyes still locked on him. Holt held the door as they entered, unsure if he was letting in strangers ... or something he'd been missing all along ... as he closed the door behind them. The wind outside picked up again, howling as it always did, but it no longer sounded. So empty. The next morning arrived with golden light creeping across the worn pine floors of Holt Barrett's kitchen. The smell hit him before his boots even touched the stairs, something buttery and warm with a sharp edge of sizzling meat. He paused mid-step, blinking like a man who'd forgotten what breakfast was supposed to smell like. He walked down into the kitchen, boots thudding, half expecting to find it all in his imagination. But there she was, Clara, moving through the space like she'd been born to it. Her shawl was hung neatly on a nail by the door, sleeves rolled to her elbows. A frying pan hissed over the stove, biscuits rose in a battered tin tray in the oven, and the chip teapot sat steaming beside. The firebox. The warmth was real. The smells were real. The humming soft low, familiar, was real too. Lottie sat curled in the corner with her wooden doll, watching her mother work with wide eyes, knees hugged to her chest. She didn't speak, but Holt noticed her following Clara's movements. Closely like the cooking was something sacred and quiet, and she was afraid to break the spell. Clara turned slightly when she saw him. "Hope you don't mind," she said. "There wasn't much in the pantry, but I made do." He grunted, unsure how to say he hadn't smelled something this good since before his wife died. He pulled out a chair and sat, watching as she plated. Eggs, salt pork, and a biscuit, and slid the dish in front of him. "I'll feed Lottie after." "She eats light in the mornings," she said, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted rag. "She's shy with new faces." Holt nodded, picking up his fork. The first bite sent a strange ache through his chest. The eggs were fluffy, the biscuit buttery, the salt pork crisp just right. He chewed slowly, staring at the plate, his throat tight. "You don't talk much, do you?" Clara asked gently. Holt swallowed. "Used to. She didn't push. Just moved back to the stove, quiet but not uncomfortable." He realized how long it had been since someone filled the space around him without making it feel crowded. The little girl caught his gaze again. She was still hugging that carved doll so worn the paint was nearly gone and staring at him with that same unnerving stillness. Something about her didn't fit the way kids usually did. She wasn't fidgety. She wasn't loud. She watched, measured, and seemed too small for the weight in her eyes. "You carve that?" he asked, nodding toward the doll. Clara looked over her shoulder, surprised he spoke at all. "No, it was a gift. Someone gave it to me long ago, before she was born." Holt narrowed his eyes. "Looks just like one my wife used to make. She carved toys for a living. Sold them at church fairs. Even had a stall in Abilene once." Clara didn't reply. Just turned away and stirred the pan slower. Her hand trembled slightly. Lottie clutched the doll tighter, scooting closer to the fireplace. He didn't press. But he couldn't ignore the itch forming at the back of his mind, like a question that had waited years to be asked was finally waking up. After breakfast, Clara insisted on doing the dishes. Holt took his coffee out to the porch. The sun had risen now, casting long shadows over the pasture. The cattle were fewer than they should have been. The fence near the creek needed mending. The barn roof sagged where the last storm had torn. A few shingles loose. Still, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the same heavy dread looking at the work ahead. There was movement in the house again. A rhythm, a warmth. He heard soft footsteps and glanced sideways. Lottie had followed him out. She didn't say anything, just walked to the edge of the porch and sat on the top step, knees pulled up, her doll in her lap. "You ever ridden a horse?" Holt asked after a moment. She gave the tiniest nod. "Like it?" Another nod. She glanced back at the door, unsure if she was allowed to speak. "Well," Holt said, clearing his throat, "once. The sun's a little higher. Maybe you and I can go down to the barn. You can meet Smokey. He's slow and stubborn. Might suit you." Lottie looked up at him, then really looked, and her lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. Inside, Clara watched through the window. Her hands were still wet from the dishes, her shoulders rigid. She saw the way her daughter glanced at Holt, saw the way he looked back, confused, softened, haunted. She whispered under her breath, "Don't go doing what I did, little one. Hearts don't heal easy out here." But it was already too late. The fire cracked and popped in the hearth that evening, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls of Holt Barrett's sitting room. Outside, a chill had settled over the plains. The windows fogged at the edges, but inside, the house was warmer than it had been in years. Holt sat in his usual chair, booted feet resting on the worn rug, arms crossed loosely over his chest. Across from him, Clara quietly mended one of Lottie's stockings by lantern light, her fingers nimble, eyes focused. The girl herself was curled near the fire, wrapped in a quilt far too large for her, the carved doll clutched to her chest like it was stitched to her hands. The quiet was soft, not sharp like it used to be. Holt had grown used to silence feeling, like punishment, a reminder of everything that had been taken from him. But tonight, it felt almost peaceful almost. He watched Lottie from the corner of his eye. Something about her continued to gnaw at him. Her tiny feet had made no sound on the porch this morning, and she never asked for anything, not a drink, not a toy, not even attention. She studied the world with the quiet knowing of someone who had seen too much too young. And those eyes, of hers brown flecked with hazel, looked almost exactly like his wife's. He cleared his throat. "She always that quiet?" Clara looked up, surprised he'd spoken. "Lottie?" she asked, her voice low. "Always been soft-spoken, but lately yes. She don't speak unless she has to. She sick?" "No," Clara shook her head, threading the needle again. "Not in a way doctors would treat, anyhow. She lost someone. It changes a child." Holt didn't press. He understood loss well enough. A long silence stretched between them before Clara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "This time, you keep a clean house for a man living alone." He smirked faintly. "Don't confuse sparse with clean. Dust doesn't bother me much. Still," she said, "you made a life out here. Hard to do without help." "I had help," he replied quietly, staring into the flames. "She died." Clara nodded slowly. "I figured." He turned to her, and in the lamplight he could see her face clearer, tired, but strong. The kind of strength a person only earns from surviving things others wouldn't talk about. She didn't look shocked by his admission, just understanding. Like she'd seen her share of graves too. "Your wife," she said gently, "did she pass recently?" 3 years ago, Holt answered. "Childbirth. Took the baby with her." The fire popped sharply, making Lottie flinch in her sleep. Clara's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Holt noticed the flicker in her eyes and saw the way her fingers paused over the needle. "You knew her?" he asked suddenly, the question out before he could stop it. Clara hesitated. "No," she said at last, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. He let it hang in the air. Lottie stirred under her quilt. Her small frame shifted toward the fire, and the quilt slid just enough to reveal the tiny scar near her temple. Holt narrowed his eyes. "That scar," he murmured. "What happened?" Clara's tone shifted, guarded now. "A fall, when she was 4. She's 6 now?" Clara nodded. He turned back toward the fire, mind racing. Something didn't sit right. The timeline. The way the girl stared at him like she knew something he didn't. The doll. The silence. That night, long after Clara and Lottie had gone to the spare room, Holt sat alone in front of the dying fire, holding a whiskey glass he hadn't touched in months. He stared at the old photograph on the mantel, his wife Sarah smiling in a summer dress, standing next to a half-built cradle. She never got to finish it. The baby never came home. He buried them both on the hill behind the barn. And yet, here he was. A girl asleep under his roof with Sarah's eyes. A woman who stirred something in him he thought long dead. A warmth he couldn't make sense of, and a shadow creeping behind it that felt too familiar. He rose slowly and walked to the mantel, brushing dust from the base of the photograph. Next to it sat a wooden doll, Sarah's last carving, the one she said she'd make for their daughter. Holt had never moved it, never even touched it. He looked at it. then looked toward the closed guest room door, and something in his chest tightened, uncertain, uneasy. And alive. The next morning broke with a dull gray light creeping over the prairie, casting long shadows across the frost-kissed fence posts. The wind had quieted, and the land stood still, as if waiting. Holt was already outside, his breath clouding in the morning air, saddle in one hand, a bridle slung over his shoulder. Smoky, his oldest and most temperamental gelding, stood half awake. In the corral, ears twitching, tail swishing at invisible flies. The barn behind them loomed large and worn, patched with mismatched planks from years of repairs. It was a place of memory more than utility now. Clara watched from the kitchen window, hands gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing anchoring her to the present. Behind her, Lottie slid her small arms into a too-big coat, eyes flicking. Toward the barn with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You sure?" Clara asked gently, kneeling to tie the coat tighter around her daughter's waist. Lottie nodded. "He said I could." Clara hesitated. "Be careful. Stay where he can see you." Lottie nodded again and slipped out the door without another word. Outside, Holt heard the soft shuffle of boots behind him and turned to see the girl standing just outside the barn's shadow. She looked even smaller against the open sky. For a moment, she didn't move, just stared at him like she was trying to measure if he meant what he said the night before. "Well," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you comin' or not?" She stepped forward, hesitant at first, then quicker when Smokey raised his head to sniff the air. Holt handed her a piece of apple from his pocket. "Go on, let him smell you first. He don't like surprises." Lottie held out the slice with both hands. Smokey leaned down and gently nibbled it from her palm, his lips tickling her skin. She giggled quiet and unexpected, and Holt nearly dropped the saddle. That sound. It didn't belong to grief. It belonged to something lighter. Something healing. "You ever been in a barn before?" he asked. She nodded. "Mama worked in one. Cleaning stalls." "When I was little," he raised an eyebrow. "You're still little." She gave a lopsided shrug, clearly not convinced. He chuckled. "Well, come on then." Inside, the barn smelled of hay, leather, and time. Dust floated in shafts of morning light that poured through the cracks. Tools hung on the wall just where Holt had left them. Saddles, harnesses, his wife's side saddle, still hanging by the loft ladder like she might come get it any day now. As Lottie explored with wide eyes, Holt found himself watching her more. Then working. She moved with care, touching things softly like she respected the space. She ran her hand along the flank of an old draft mule, peeked into the empty chicken stall, then paused by the back wall. She turned and pointed. "What's that?" Holt followed her gaze. In the shadow stood a half-finished cradle, dry wood. Curled at the edges, one rocker still missing. He didn't answer for a moment. "That," he said finally, "was something I never finished." "Why not?" Holt didn't look at her. "Because the baby it was meant for never came home." Silence. Lottie stepped closer to the cradle and knelt beside it, running her fingers over the edge. "It's pretty. You made it?" Holt nodded. She sat there a moment, then looked up at him. "You could finish it for someone else." The words hit him like a blow. Not from cruelty, but from the innocence in them. The belief that something broken could still be used. That unfinished things could still find purpose. He turned away abruptly, throat tight. "Come on," he said, clearing his voice. "Let's see how you do with a brush. Smokey could use a grooming." Lottie beamed just a flicker and took the brush he handed her with two small hands. She worked slow and careful, and Smokey stood still, surprisingly cooperative. By the time they finished, Clara had come outside, her shawl wrapped tight. She leaned on the corral fence, watching them with unreadable eyes. Holt helped Lottie down from the fence rail, his big hand steady at her back. She's good with the animals, he said, nodding toward Clara. She's got a calm way, Clara. Nodded once. She's had to learn? They stood there in the morning light, all three together, but with years of silence still between them. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at Clara's hair, lifting the corners of Lottie's coat. In the shadows of the barn behind them, the cradle stood still, waiting. The wind rattled the windows that night, a dry, restless wind that carried dust and memory across the plains. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows over the floorboards of Holt Barrett's house. Lottie had fallen asleep early, curled against her mother's side on the settee. Clara sat beside her daughter, half dozing, her eyes following the shifting orange glow on the walls. Holt, silent as always, had disappeared into the back room where she'd seen him vanish each night. After dinner, alone with his thoughts and whatever ghosts kept him company. But tonight, curiosity tugged harder than usual. She gently lifted Lottie's head and laid her on the blanket-covered cushions, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. With bare feet and slow steps, Clara rose and followed the creak of the floorboards toward Holt's study. The door wasn't fully shut. She hesitated. She hadn't meant to snoop. She told herself that more than once. But there was something in the way Holt had looked at her lately, half guard, half recognition, that stirred something deep in her own bones. A knowing. A fear. She pushed the door open softly. It was a small room, barely big enough for a desk, a shelf of books, and a dented tin safe tucked in the corner. A dusty rifle hung on the wall above a faded portrait of Holt's late wife, Sarah. Clara stared at the photo a long moment, her heart twisting. Sarah had been beautiful in a quiet way. There was a softness in her face, the kind that people remembered. The kind Clara once carried herself before the war, before the shame, before the long road west. She turned toward the desk. A journal sat half open, loose papers tucked underneath. Clara's hands hovered for a breath, then gently lifted the flap, and there it was, a letter, yellowed, torn at the crease. The ink faded but still legible. It was addressed to her. Clara May Harper. Froze. Her knees weakened, and she eased down onto the old chair as if afraid the letter might vanish if she moved too quickly. The writing was unmistakably Holt's, firm, deliberate, with just enough slant to betray emotion. Dear Clara, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't even know if you're alive. War changes a man, and I doubt I'm the one you remember. But if you're out there, I want you to know I didn't forget. Not a single day has passed that I didn't think about you, or wonder if you ever had someone to lean on after I left. I meant what I said when I asked you to wait for me. I meant every word. If you're still in Abilene, I'll come for you. I'll bring nothing but my name and a promise to keep you safe. Just say the word. Holt. The letter ended there, unfinished. No signature. No postmark. No envelope. Clara sat in stunned silence, heart pounding in her ears. Her hands trembled. She remembered that winter. The rumors. The telegram that never came. She'd been told Holt had died at Shiloh. Lost in the mud and the chaos, just another. Name carved into a stone she never saw. So she had run. Pregnant. Alone. Branded with shame. Her family disowned her. The church turned its back. She had found refuge only in barns and back rooms, cooking for men who never looked her in the eye. And all that time, this letter had sat here, waiting. A floorboard groaned. She turned. Holt stood in the doorway, the lamplight catching his face just enough for her to see the look in his eyes, not anger. Not shock. Recognition. Double quote. You were never supposed to see that, he said. Voice thick. Clara stood slowly, clutching the letter to her chest like it might fly away. You were going to come for me. I tried. He stepped forward. I looked. They said you'd left Abilene. No trace. I thought, God help me, I thought maybe you didn't want to be found. I thought you were dead, she whispered. They told me you died in the war. He stared at her, jaw tight. We lost everything, didn't we? Clara swallowed. Her voice barely audible. Not everything. At that, Holt's gaze softened. He glanced past her toward the parlor, where Lottie slept soundly beneath a handmade quilt. His breath caught. Is she mine? Clara didn't answer at first. But then she slowly nodded double quotes yes. Holt's shoulders sagged. His hand found the door frame like he needed it to stay standing. For a long time, neither spoke. Nothing but the sound of wind and fire filled the space between them. Then Holt whispered, I should have found you sooner. Clara closed the distance between them. We found each other now. The night felt heavier than usual. After their whispered exchange in the study, Holt hadn't said much. He'd retreated outside for a long while, standing in the cold with his hands clenched around the porch railing, looking up at the stars like they owed him something. Clara sat alone in the front room, watching the firelight dance across the walls, listening to the soft rhythm of Lottie's breathing. She should have known this moment would come. She had carried the secret for 6 years, worn it like a stone under her skin. But hearing the words spoken aloud, is she mine? Had pulled a thread she couldn't tighten again. She rose finally and found him still outside, his figure outlined in moonlight, boots planted in frost-dusted dirt. She asleep? He asked, eyes forward. Clara nodded, like a rock. She always sleeps better in warm houses. Holt nodded once but didn't move. You could have told me sooner. I didn't know where you were, Holt. I was told you died. What was I supposed to do? Hunt you through battlefields with a newborn strapped to my back? His jaw tensed. I wrote to you. More than once. I never got a single letter, she said, stepping beside him. Not one. I didn't even know you made it out alive until 2 years after Lottie was born. And by then, the shame had buried me too deep. He looked at her now, really looked. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but no deceit. Only the weight of everything lost. I wasn't ashamed of you, he said softly. Never would have been. But others were, she murmured. The town, my family. I had a child without a ring. No one cared who the father was. Only that he was gone. He looked away again, gripping the railing tighter. If I had known, Clara placed her hand gently on his arm. I know, but we can't change what was done, Holt. Only what we do now. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with something fragile. A history neither of them had been allowed to finish. You remember that night by the river? Clara asked suddenly, a small, wry smile curling at her lips. He blinked. The one with the fireflies? She nodded. You said you'd carve our initials into the tree. I did. He chuckled once, low and rusty. Still there, far as I know. HB plus CM thought I was being bold, staking a claim on something permanent. She smiled. I remember thinking how silly it was, and how badly I wanted to believe it. The smile on Holt's face faded gently, replaced by something more tender. I believed it. A breeze rustled the dry grass at their feet. Somewhere, in the distance, a coyote cried out. But in that moment, the prairie, the sky, the broken years between them, they all seemed to fall away. What remained was the memory of two people, once young and full of hope, who had never stopped belonging to each other. You never married? Clara asked after a long pause. No, he said. Sarah and I weren't married. She helped me when I came back from the war. Her brother had served with me. I cared for her, but it wasn't the same. She died before we ever made a life. Clara's eyes widened. Then Lottie's. She's the only one, he said, voice breaking. She's my only blood. Clara let out a shaky breath, as if something inside her had finally been released. They stood together in the moonlight, shoulder to shoulder, both bracing against the wind and the truth. I can't promise I won't. Make mistakes, Holt said finally, but I'd like to know her. Be something to her, if you'll let me. Clara turned toward him, her hand finding his. You were always something to her, she said. She just didn't know what to call it yet. Inside, the fire dimmed to glowing embers. Clara and Holt stayed on the porch a long while, holding hands in silence, staring out over the plains, not mourning what they had lost, but wondering, maybe for the first time, what they still had left to gain. Morning light slipped through the gaps in the shutters, golden and quiet. Clara stirred in the small bedroom just off the kitchen, her daughter still curled beside her beneath the thick quilt. For the first time in months, maybe years, Clara had slept without dreaming of train whistles and cold floors. There was no aching fear of where they'd go next. No landlord pounding at the door. No eyes judging her. Just warmth and stillness. And the quiet of Holt Barrett's ranch. She looked down at Lottie. The child's face was so peaceful when she slept, all the weight she carried by day momentarily gone. Clara traced a finger across her daughter's forehead and whispered, "He knows now." Lottie didn't stir. Clara rose and wrapped herself in her shawl. The house smelled faintly of firewood and black coffee. Holt was already awake, seated at the table, sipping from a chipped mug. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he smiled, not forced or polite, but real. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Didn't burn the pot this time." She poured herself a cup, the silence between them now soft and shared, not stiff or awkward. "I've been thinking," he said. "I've missed 6 years of her life. I don't plan to miss another 6 minutes." Clara looked up sharply, unsure how to respond. "I know I can't fix the past," Holt continued, "but I want to give her something better than what she's had. A home, my name, if she wants it." Clara's breath caught. "You'd do that?" "I should have done it long ago." Before she could answer, small footsteps approached from the hallway. Lottie appeared in the doorway, hair a wild tangle, clutching the wooden doll. She blinked up at them both, uncertain. Holt stood and crouched near the floor, holding out a hand. "Mornin', Lottie. Sleep all right?" She hesitated. Clara offered her a reassuring nod. Slowly, the girl walked forward until she stood just inches from Holt's outstretched hand. She looked at it, then up at his face. Her eyes, so wide and serious, searched his like she was trying to understand something without asking it out loud. Then, without a word, she reached out and pressed her tiny hand into his. It was a small thing, but to Holt, it might as well have been the world. He swallowed hard. "I'd like to show you something today, if your mama says it's all right." Clara glanced at her daughter, then back at him. "What is it? The pasture? South End. There's an old mesquite tree out there. Carved initials on it once. Figured maybe she'd like to see the place where it all began." Clara nodded softly. "We'd like that." Lottie's grip on Holt's hand tightened just slightly. He gave her a crooked smile. "Think you're up for a ride?" She nodded. By mid-morning, they were saddled and riding slow along the narrow trail behind the barn. Holt rode beside Clara, Lottie tucked securely in front of him, tiny hands gripping the saddle horn. She didn't speak, but she kept turning her head, eyes scanning everything. The swaying grass, the birds overhead, the hills that looked like they went on forever. When they reached the tree, Holt dismounted and lifted Lottie down gently. "There," he said, pointing to the rough bark. "See them?" She leaned forward, tracing the faded initials. HB plus CM had worn them, but they were still visible. Still waiting. Clara stood behind them, arms folded, her face unreadable. Lottie turned toward Holt. "That's Mama's name," he nodded. "It is. And yours?" He crouched beside her again. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. Her mouth opened slightly like she might say something, but no words came. Then she did something that took both adults by surprise. She reached out and touched Holt's cheek. Her little fingers brushed the rough stubble there. Gentle and curious. "You look like me," she said. Holt's heart nearly stopped. "I reckon I do," he whispered. Lottie stepped back and looked at Clara. "Mama?" Clara knelt beside her. "Yes, baby? Can I call him Pa?" The question came like thunder in the still morning, not forced, not coached. Just pure and honest from the heart of a child who had finally found something that made sense. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Holt stared at the ground, breathing hard, then looked up at her with a soft smile. "You can call me whatever you want," he said, voice thick. "But I'd be honored if you did." Lottie nodded, satisfied, then reached for his hand again, and in her eyes, clear, steady, and unafraid, Holt saw everything he had lost and everything he'd just begun to find. The days that followed were unlike any Holt Barrett had known in years. Lottie's laugh still rare, still soft, began to appear like a bird testing its wings. Clara no longer kept her distance. She moved through the house like she belonged there, because she did. The shadows hadn't vanished completely, but they had retreated like winter, giving ground to spring. Holt found himself doing things he hadn't done in years. He fixed the creaking porch steps, mended the garden gate, and took Lottie riding every afternoon. She never asked to go, she simply stood near the tack room. When he saddled the horses, her doll under one arm and silent excitement in her eyes, he'd lift her into the saddle like it was the most natural thing in the world. One morning, Clara stood in the doorway with coffee in hand, watching Holt lift Lottie into the saddle again. "She doesn't speak much," she said, "but she remembers everything." "I've noticed," Holt said, securing the stirrups. "She'll be a better rider than me soon." "She already is," Clara teased. He looked up at her and smiled. "You've got grit, Clara," raising her on your rear. "Own like that." Clara looked down. "Didn't have much of a choice." "You did," he said softly. "You chose to fight, to keep going." "That's not nothing." She looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. It didn't feel brave. It felt like drowning in slow motion. He stepped closer. "You kept her afloat." She blinked fast, turning back toward the house. "I just did what I had to." But Holt watched her walk away, and something inside him stirred, respect, admiration, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. That night, Clara cooked stew with the last of the root, vegetables, and Holt brought out the good plates without saying a word. Lottie helped set the tablespoons slightly crooked, napkins folded like puzzles, but Holt didn't correct her. He just smiled out as they sat together. The warmth between them was different now. Real, lived in. Not a second chance, but maybe the chance they should have had from the start. After Lottie went to bed, Holt and Clara stayed by the fire, sitting close but not touching. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about offering you both something permanent." Clara looked over, eyebrows raised. "This ranch," he continued, "could use a woman's hand and a child's laughter. I could use them both. What I mean is, if you wanted to stay, not just as a cook, but as part of this place, I'd be grateful." Clara set her mug down. "Are you asking me to stay for work, Holt, or for something else?" He met her eyes without flinching. "For something else." She let out a slow breath. "You sure it's not just the quiet getting? To you, or guilt?" "I've been quiet for years," he said. "And I know guilt. This ain't it." He stood and paced a little, then turned back to her. "You and I, we were something once. And time didn't kill that, just buried it under loss. But it's still there. I feel it when Lottie laughs, when you hum while you cook, when I look at the porch and can finally imagine someone sitting beside me again." Clara stood too. Slowly. "I didn't come here looking for a man," she said. "I came to survive, and I'm not offering survival," he replied. "I'm offering a home, a name, A life we can build from what's left. Clara's breath hitched. And Lottie? She's ours, Holt said. She always has been. I'd raise her like she was born under this roof. Because in my heart, she was. Clara took a step closer. You're not afraid of what folks'll say? I've already buried more than most men live through, Holt said. I'm not afraid of a damn thing except losing you two. The silence between them grew thick, like the pause before a storm or before a kiss. Then Clara reached up and touched his cheek. You always were a fool, she whispered. But maybe now you're my fool. He smiled then, real and wide, and pulled her gently into his arms. They stood there, wrapped in firelight and forgiveness, and in the next room, Lottie stirred but did not wake. Outside, the wind finally calmed, and inside the ranch house, a cowboy who had once lost everything now stood at the edge of something. Knew something better, a second chance not given but earned. The sun was just rising when Holt heard the sound of hooves crunching across the dry earth, a slow, deliberate approach. He stepped out onto the porch, his rifle propped casually near the door, though something in his gut tightened like a storm. Cloud rolling in. A lone rider was approaching from the south, dressed in a dark coat and riding a chestnut horse that looked too clean for ranch work. The man sat tall in the saddle, hat low over his eyes, and didn't wave as he neared. Clara came to the door behind Holt, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You know him? She asked quietly. No, Holt muttered. But I don't like the way he rides. The stranger stopped a dozen yards from the porch and tipped his hat back, revealing a clean-shaven face, sunburned and hard-set. He looked at Clara, then Holt. Name's Raymond Caskey, he said. I'm looking for a woman named Clara Harper. Traveled west a few weeks back with a child. Clara went stiff. Holt stepped in front of her. You found her. What do you want? Raymond's eyes narrowed. Business. Legal business. Clara's voice came out tight. What kind of business? Raymond pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and held it up. I work for the Adams family. You were employed by them in Dodge cooking, cleaning, watching after their boy. They say you took something when you left. Clara's eyes went wide, and Holt could feel her step back. I didn't take a damn thing, she said, her voice steady but shaking beneath. Raymond shrugged. That's not what they say. Claim you left in the night with a child that doesn't belong to you? Silence dropped like a hammer between them. Lottie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Clara turned and pulled her close, shielding her with her body. She's mine, Clara said sharply. She was born in their house, Raymond countered. And there ain't no birth certificate proving otherwise. Legally, she's their ward until otherwise stated. And they're mighty interested in getting her back. Holt stepped off the porch, his boots landing hard on the dry ground. He walked up until he stood just feet from Raymond's horse. She's not going anywhere, Holt growled. Not with you, not with them. Raymond didn't flinch. You got papers to back that up? No, but I got a rifle and a name in this county. You really want to ride back and say you tried talking a child from Holt Barrett? The riders. Eyes flicked from Holt to the rifle resting beside the door, then to Clara holding the girl like a shield. I don't want no trouble, Raymond said. But I was paid to bring her back. You'll ride back empty then, Holt said. Tell the Adamses to send a lawyer next time. And make sure they come with a real judge. Raymond held Holt's gaze a moment longer, then slowly folded the paper and tucked it away. Suit yourself, he muttered. But this ain't over. He turned his horse and rode off, not in a rush, but not slowly either. Like a man who didn't like what he'd found out as the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Holt turned back to Clara, who still held Lottie like she might be ripped away at any second. Tell me the truth, he said. All of it. Clara looked down at her daughter, Then up at Holt. I worked for them for 2 years, she said. They treated me like hired dirt, but their son, he got close to me. Closer than he should have. Then one day, he didn't come home. She paused, swallowing hard. They never cared about her. Not until they saw she had his eyes. Then they said she was theirs. That I couldn't prove she wasn't. They let me raise her while it suited them, and when it didn't, I ran. Holt stared at her for a long, hard moment. His chest rose and fell, then he nodded. She's ours now, he said. And no man's taking her from this ranch unless it's over my dead body. Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't cry. She simply clutched Lottie closer, and Lottie, silent and wise beyond her years, leaned into the safety of them both. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the prairie wind began to stir again, but this time Holt wasn't bracing for the storm. Was ready to stand in front of it. A week passed. The stranger hadn't returned. No lawyers came, no telegrams. Just silence. But silence, Holt had learned, wasn't always the same as peace. He'd kept his rifle closer, fixed the front gate, watched the road every morning. Clara didn't say much, but she moved differently. Now guarded, alert, like a woman bracing for impact. Still, life on the ranch carried on. And for the first time in years, there was laughter in the house. Real laughter. Lottie had taken to following Holt like a shadow. She helped him with the chickens, brought him nails while he fixed the fencing, and even tried unsuccessfully to milk the old cow, causing a splash and a fit of giggles that echoed into the fields. She called him Pa now. Every time she said it, Holt felt a strange ache in his chest. Not pain. Not grief. Something like healing. One evening, just as the sun spilled gold over the prairie and turned the barn red at the edges, Clara stood on the porch in her apron, watching Holt and Lottie chase a runaway calf through the field. She laughed, really laughed, and it sounded so natural it startled her. When they returned muddy, winded, and triumphant, Holt caught her eye. And the look they shared said what words couldn't. This is what we were meant to be. Later that night, over supper, Holt reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the table. Clara looked down. It was a simple silver band. Old, scratched, and beautiful. Her eyes flicked up to him. Is that my mother's? He said. She wore it till the day she died. Told me to give it to a woman who could outwork me and outlove me. I think I finally found her. Clara blinked fast, heart pounding. I know we've taken the long way round, Holt continued, but I'd like to make it right. Not just for me, for her. He nodded toward Lottie, who sat silently at the end of the table, watching everything like a little owl. Clara looked at her daughter, then back at the ring. I don't need a piece of silver to know what we have, she whispered. But I'd still like to see it on your hand, he said gently. Clara's voice shook. Are you asking me to marry you, Holt Barrett? He smiled. No, Clara May Harper. I'm asking you to come home. Not just to this house, but to us, all three of us, for good. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood, walked around the table, and placed her hand in his. You already are my home, she said. He slipped the ring on her finger. Lottie clapped softly, then stood and walked over to them, wrapping her arms around both their legs like a bundle of quiet joy. They married in the small clearing beneath the old mesquite tree, where their initials still lingered on the bark. The preacher from town rode out in a borrowed wagon, the same man who'd once baptized Holt's baby brother decades ago. No music, no crowd. Just prairie wind, wildflowers, and the sound of Clara saying yes. Lottie wore a white ribbon in her hair and held the carved wooden doll in one hand, a bouquet in the other. She stood between them when they said their vows. Afterward, they shared a supper of fresh bread, roast chicken, and sweet coffee by firelight. The three of them sat beneath the stars, No longer a collection of what was broken, but something whole. Something earned. That night, after Lottie had fallen asleep curled up on the quilt her mother had stitched from scraps, Holt and Clara sat on the porch, shoulder to shoulder. "I used to think this ranch would be my grave," Holt said. "Just a quiet place to rot out my years," Clara turned to him. "And now?" He looked toward the fields, where the moonlight touched the tops of the grass like silver. "Now I think it might be where I finally start living." She leaned, her head on his shoulder. "We've all been through hell," she murmured. "But maybe the Lord kept this little piece of land just for us." He kissed her temple gently. "You were never running," he said. "You were always coming home." The wind rolled over the hills, gentle now, and in the house behind them, where a little girl finally slept without fear, love had taken root again, quiet, steady, and sure. They were no longer just survivors. They were family. They were finally home.